I see a lot of familiar faces here, so I appreciate you coming out. My name is Paul Cavonis. I'm an attorney with the law firm of DeLoach, Hofstra and Cavonis. You may know our office. We're at the corner of Seminole Boulevard and 86th Avenue. We're a full-service law firm. We've been in the community for 45 years. I'm board certified in civil trial law. I practice in the areas of civil litigation, insurance disputes, and injury. My partner, Rep. DeLoach, is board certified in elder law. He practices in the area of estate planning. My partner, Joseph Murphy, is board certified in real estate. He obviously heads up our real estate department, and he manages our title company, Seminole Title Company. I want to express really my sincere sympathy for the losses that many of you have sustained. We have many friends, family, and relatives who sustained serious losses. Some of these losses are catastrophic, and some of them are uninsured from these unprecedented storm events. Personally, we've suffered losses. We have people in our office who suffered catastrophic losses, loss of their home. And unfortunately, a lot of those losses are uninsured. And we're going to talk about some remedies and assistance that you may have available to you under the circumstances. So we are dealing with a lot of the same issues that you're dealing with. I'm in the middle of a cleanup in my house as we speak, and I'm still not done with that, unfortunately. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of an overview of the presentation. This is meant to be a general overview of the types of insurance that you're likely to deal with as a result of these storm events, the claims administration process, pushing back on unfair claim practices, and we're going to talk about the FEMA 50% rule. I was talking to someone in the audience and telling him that, based on the volume of calls that we're getting, 80 or 85% of the calls that we're getting relate to the FEMA 50% rule. And we really are in uncharted waters as far as this area goes. We haven't had this type of storm event really for over 100 years, and then we had back-to-back storm events. And the days of a wink and a nod dealing with the FEMA 50% rule are over. We're in a new day and age when it comes to those claims. So you need to know what insurance you have. You need to know what claims are covered under those insurance policies. Now, there are two basic types of insurance that we're going to talk about for purposes of this presentation. One is flood insurance. The other is homeowners insurance, also known as HOI insurance. That's the abbreviation. It's important that you understand the distinction between them. So let's first talk about flood insurance. Now, the title seems self-explanatory, right? It's flood insurance. Seems kind of obvious. You're entitled to damages based on flood damage, but it isn't always that easy. Now, you have to understand how a flood is defined for purposes of these policies. And I'm going to read to you a couple of the definitions. A flood is an overflow of inland or tidal waters, also the unusual and rapid accumulation or runoff of surface waters from any source. There's some other definitions, mudslides, things like that, which really aren't applicable to our area. And there are two basic types of flood insurance. The first type is the flood insurance available under the National Flood Insurance Program. That's the program administered by FEMA. That's NFIP. And then there is private insurance, private flood insurance. You need to understand the distinction between the two of them because the rules concerning the submission of claims, the claims process, your appeal rights and your litigation rights are different depending on which flood policy you have. Now, under the FEMA federal flood policies, there's a maximum of $250,000 available for structures, residential structures, a maximum of $500,000 available for commercial structures, and there's some additional add-on coverage that you could have. It's not automatic, you have to elect it, and that's for contents personal property. It's $100,000, up to $100,000 for residential, up to $500,000 for commercial, including inventory and those types of items. Now, I'm going to encourage you to take advantage of the really good resources that FEMA has on its website. They have a lot of good checklists and they have a lot of good technical bulletins, which will answer in more detail than we're going to be able to get into today, some of these questions concerning the claims administration process and what you can do specifically when you're trying to bring your property up to code if that is required. In preparation for this presentation today, I ran across a very good technical bulletin about dry floodproofing, which is different than wet floodproofing that you see like in a floodplain involving commercial structures. So a lot of good resources there. So that is kind of an overview of the federal, the FEMA flood insurance, but you could also have private flood insurance. Private flood insurance can have higher limits of coverage and could also have coverages which might not be available under the federal flood insurance, such as reimbursement for living expenses. Now, most of these policies have what's called an increased cost of compliance. It's ICC coverage, which applies when your flood damage is severe and you've sustained what's called substantial damage. That definition will become very important when we talk about the 50% rule, because how the federal government defines substantial damage will determine whether or not you can rebuild a structure. This coverage will provide additional benefits to bring your property up to code. It's fairly limited and it's not going to really help, I think, the vast majority of homeowners if they have to bring their property up to code. So that's kind of an overview of the two types of flood insurance. Now we have homeowners insurance, the HOI insurance. Homeowners insurance, first and foremost, you have to understand, does not cover flood damage. Okay? Does not cover the flood damage. There are many property owners, specifically with Milton, who experienced flooding even though they were not in a flood zone. There were lots of incidents of inland flooding, not coastal flooding, but inland flooding from Milton, which resulted in flood damage for people not in a flood zone, and many of these folks don't have flood insurance. They simply don't have it. These are uninsured losses. So those losses are simply uninsured. They may qualify for other FEMA assistance programs, and I would refer you back to the FEMA website for those programs. I'll give you an example. My son and I have adjacent homes. We live next to a very large pond. Milton caused the pond to overflow. The water came through our backyards and flooded about 10 houses behind ours completely because they're low, about 1.5 feet lower than our property. Talked to a lot of those people. None of them had flood insurance because they were not in a flood zone. Those are all uninsured losses. The lesson there is for the future, even if you are not in a flood zone or this special hazard flood area, I would encourage you to purchase flood insurance. If you are not in a flood zone, you're not in this hazard area, the insurance is pretty inexpensive. We have friends who live adjacent to the Pinellas Trail. Not in a flood zone. They've lived there for probably 35 years and never once had an instance of flooding. The Pinellas Trail was adjacent to a pond. The pond overflowed. That water came rushing down the Pinellas Trail because of the way they kind of built up the sides of the Pinellas Trail. There was a gap in this berm, which led directly to our friend's home. All of that water went right through their house down to the street, which was at a lower elevation. They paid $300 for that coverage. And the payout on that will probably be close to 6 figures. And they're glad they have it. So again, for the future, even if you're not in a flood zone, we would encourage you to purchase that coverage since it is relatively inexpensive. Well, we now know that flood damages are not covered under a homeowner's insurance policy. What is? Well, windstorm is the big coverage, and also other perils. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, interestingly, Helene in our area was primarily a coastal flood event. We did not experience on inland. I did not experience any inland flooding from Helene, whereas Milton was mostly an inland flooding event and a windstorm damage event. And we experienced both of those. These are two separate events. And if you sustain damage from either of these events, you're going to be making separate claims. And you may be making multiple claims for each of those events. And our recommendations to our clients is this: even if you do not think something is covered under one of your policies, because maybe I'm telling you this or you know it, make the claim anyway. Make the claim anyway, so you're within the claim deadlines that we're going to talk about in a minute, and there can be no dispute as to the timely submission of the claims, because what you're going to hear from me later on is that the flood insurance carriers will often point the finger at the HOI insurance carrier and vice versa in an effort to avoid paying out under their policies. It's important for you to know that the type of loss dictates what policy will pay. And as I just stated, these carriers will often try to deflect and improperly deny coverage under their policy and improperly tell you that it's something that should be covered under another policy. I'm going to give you some real examples. These are calls that we've received over the last several weeks. One is a sewer backup. We get lots of calls about a sewer backup. Now, typically, a sewer backup would be something that's covered under an HOI policy. There is additional coverage that you can get under your homeowner's insurance for a sewer backup and damages caused by a sewer backup. But if the sewer backup was caused by flood, it's not a claim under your homeowner's insurance policy. It's actually a claim under your flood policy. So in that instance, you make the claim under both. Okay. But we know, certainly from what happened in St. Petersburg, where I think one of their plants went down, there were lots of sewer backups which can be directly traced to the flooding. So it's not a traditional sewer backup as we would commonly experience. It was something that was caused by flood. Now, the flood adjuster that you may be dealing with may be saying, no, this is an HOI claim. The HOI adjuster is going to be saying, no, this is a flood claim. You make it under both policies, and then if you can't sort it out on your own, you either hire a licensed adjuster to assist, or you get an attorney involved to assist you with that. But many of the instances of sewer backups has been well documented. There's been a lot of news coverage. We know what facilities went down. We generally know where the flooding occurred. So I think that's going to be a fairly easy issue to resolve. Another one that we get calls on are fire. In instances of structures burning down because the electrical systems primarily were compromised because of the water intrusion, right? Salt water, as you know, highly corrosive. It gets in there, these panels short out, and we see structure fires. Well, you would think, okay, well, that's caused by the flood, so that might be a flood insurance claim, but our experience has been those are primarily homeowner insurance claims. But again, the lesson is submit to both. Submit to both so you don't get caught flat-footed. Another issue concerns wind-driven rain. Most lay people who don't operate in this arcane world of insurance or the law, where we use terms that most normal people simply don't understand, right? You get water in your house, you think it's a flood. Going back to the definition of flood for purposes of the flood insurance policies, we know that it has to be inland or coastal driven water or surface water. Sudden. Wind-driven rain is not a flood event under those policies. It is a claim that you would make under your homeowner insurance. My son experienced that exact same loss. Properties, 3 or 4 houses from him flooded. He did not flood, but he had significant damage because of wind-driven rain, primarily through windows, primarily through the thresholds of doors, and there might have been also an issue with hydrostatic pressure. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. When the water level in the ground elevates, it can force water up through your concrete slab because your concrete slab is porous. That's what we call hydrostatic pressure. This is why when they do a slab, they do a vapor barrier, right? Supposed to stop that, also for bug control. But I know instances of people who had losses because of hydrostatic pressure. We had unprecedented rain levels, I think 17.5 inches in a very short period of time. I personally lost a lot of trees because the ground got so saturated, the root balls just fell over. And I experienced some instances of that hydrostatic water pressure intrusion. Now, I told you earlier that you had to be aware of what type of flood policy you have, FEMA versus private, because the deadlines are different, and we're going to talk about those. Let's first talk about the NFIP or FEMA flood policies. Now, again, if you have that policy, these are your deadlines. If you're unsure whether you have the FEMA policy or a private policy, look on your policy, look on your declarations page. Your declarations page is the summary of your coverages, and it will say, or should say, NFIP, even though it may be through a company that you recognize and it doesn't appear to have any association with the federal government. If you're still unsure, you can contact us, or you can call your agent or talk to the adjuster. Those claims, the FEMA flood policies, have to be reported within a reasonable time, and contested proofs of loss, this is important, typically had to be submitted within 60 days of the loss. That's been extended. 120 days for Helene, 120 days for Milton. And those deadlines are coming up in January and February. So don't delay. Make sure you're submitting those claims. You can do successive proofs of loss. Typically, what happens? You do a proof of loss thinking your damages are limited to A and B. Your contractor gets in there, they start removing things, and they determine that you also have damages, C and D, which you didn't initially submit. So you want to submit through a supplemental proof of claim any additional damages, but make sure all of your proofs of loss, all of your claims are within the time period. The statute of limitations for bringing any type of action under the FEMA policies is 1 year. You have 60 days to appeal any FEMA decision letter. Now, remember, when you're dealing with the federal government, these back policies, federal government makes up its own rules. They're special, right? Your rights are diminished. Those claims against those types of insurers who are backed by the government, those are federal court actions. Your right to recover attorney fees in the event you have to bring any type of action against them is severely limited. And that is an important consideration when you decide whether or not you're going to hire someone to assist you with the claim. Typically, adjusters who help you, these licensed adjusters, they're about 10% of whatever you get. Attorneys are more money. We're charging, I think, 25%. If we go into litigation, it's more. But I have an honest conversation with my clients about the cost effectiveness of hiring anyone. Because what you don't want to do is wind up paying your lawyer or the adjuster more than whatever increased amount you expect to get by engaging an expert to assist you with that. Well, how do you do that? Well, the first thing that you do is you get your own estimates, get your own contractors, you document your own losses so you can determine what your true losses are. And we're going to talk about that in more detail when we talk about the claims administration process. But you need to know from an independent source, not your adjuster, what your damages are. So you can determine what the difference is between what is being offered to you and what your real damages are. That difference is what you're arguing over. If the difference is small, it may not make any sense to get someone else involved. If the difference is large, then it becomes cost effective to incur the expense of some type of professional to assist you. I'll give you some examples when we were handling some of the Ian claims. I'm a car guy. Many of you know that. I have friends from England that I see when I travel to a race in France, and they sustained a lot of damage to homes that they owned in Coral Gables, or Cape Coral rather. A lot of the original offers were in the neighborhood of $110,000, $120,000, $150,000. I got involved, and most of those claims were then maxed out to $250,000. And it's not because I did something magical. It's not because I'm a genius. Quite frankly, it's not because I did something that's even outside your capability to do. We simply got competing contractor estimates, and we're able to demonstrate to these adjusters that the formulations that they were using, the amounts that they were using, was not an accurate reflection of the damages that these folks sustained. So in that instance, it made a whole lot of sense to get me involved, because in many of those instances, it was a 40% increase in what the payout was. Under these FEMA policies, understand the deadlines are strict. There's no grace period. There's no forgiveness. You don't comply, you compromise your claim, sometimes fatally. Now let's shift to private flood insurance and homeowner insurance, wind and other perils. Again, those claims have to be reported within a reasonable time, but no later than 12 months after the date of loss. That's a change in the law. There were substantial changes in the way claims were brought against insurance companies. Big changes. Used to be longer, now it's 1 year. Most people are not going to run afoul of that on their initial loss, right? Their initial claim. They're going to run afoul of it on these supplemental claims for the reasons that we talked about before. You know, it's very difficult to even find someone to do this work right now because everyone's in high demand. It's difficult to get them to come out. There may be a significant delay before the additional damages that you were not originally aware of come to light. That is why it is very important that you move with some urgency regarding that. Even if you can't get the work done, maybe it's a financial issue, whatever the case may be, at least submit these claims. Do what you can to get these claims timely submitted. Supplemental claims on the HOI and the private flood insurance have to be made within 18 months after the date of loss, right? 18 months. Proof of loss typically due about 60 days after the request or otherwise specified in your policy. This is why it's important that you understand your policy language, okay? Insurance policies are not fun to read. They're terrible to read. You know, and I like to describe insurance companies as, or the policies as, look, it looks great in the beginning. These are all your coverages. You know, there's 2 pages of all the great things the insurance company is going to do for you. And then there's 82 pages of the exclusions and the exceptions and all the hoops and hurdles that you got to jump through in order to establish your claim. But it's very important that you understand your policies. The deadlines with these private flood insurance policies and the HOI policies, they can be extended. There is an opportunity to argue that there was substantial compliance on your part with various proofs of claim. So there's a little bit more leeway, but it's better not to even have to make that argument. Statute of limitations against those carriers is 5 years, not 1 year. Let's talk about your duty to mitigate your damages to the extent that you can. Mitigation of your damage is simply trying to prevent further damage to your property. The obvious example that I give is something damages your roof. There's a big hole in your roof. You can't stand there and look at it and pine and, rub your hands and do nothing. You got to do something in order to mitigate your damages. Many of you may be familiar with Operation Blue Roof. That is, I think, an Army Corps of Engineer program where they'll come and they'll tarp your roof. That's a good example of mitigating your damages. And by the way, that deadline is coming up November 5th if you have that type of an issue. And I'm going to encourage you to go to the Pinellas County website because they have a really good resource page for the various assistance programs and the deadlines for those programs. And that is disaster.pinellas.gov. Again, it's disaster.pinellas.gov. And I'll give Pinellas County a lot of credit. They did a really good job with the various programs that are available, things that we're really not even going to talk about today. So familiarize yourself with them. Got to document your losses. That's a biggie. Got to document your losses. These insurance adjusters are not your friends. They're, as I always say, these insurance companies are in the business of collecting premiums for insurance and paying as little as possible on claims. I mean, that's the business model. I'm not being overly dramatic. That's not hyperbole. That's the way it works. That's how they make money. If it's not documented, they're going to fight you tooth and nail on it. Okay. In a flood event, you want to document the water line. Sometimes it's obvious, I've seen houses where the debris is up to here. Mark it, take pictures of it, take a tape measure, make sure that you are documenting that. Take pictures of every serial number and model number you can get your hands on. Your appliances, camera equipment, firearms, whatever it is, take pictures of everything. We live in the age of digital pictures, so it's not like you have to go and spend $100 getting physical pictures developed, right? Pictures of videos of everything, and I mean everything, no matter whether you think you got coverage for it or not. It is much better to have that information if you need it later on than to need it and not have it, right? That's obvious. So make sure you document absolutely everything. Keep all your receipts. Okay? Keep all your receipts. I'm going to give you some practical advice I learned the hard way. Most of these receipts are printed on thermal paper, right? You take your receipts, you stick them someplace, and in 5 months, you have a white piece of paper. Guilty. That's happened to me. Make sure you scan them, take copies of them, so you actually have your receipts when you need them down the road. Keep a log of all of your expenses, everything, every penny, with the date, the item, why you got it. Timely submit your claims. We talked about that earlier. We talked about the deadlines. So let's talk about a common claim submission process. What happens? You call up your insurance company, the insurance company that you faithfully paid your premiums to all of these years, and you finally need them. So what do? They send out an adjuster. The adjuster is going to be overwhelmed, may have a bad attitude, may not be terribly sympathetic to your particular situation. They're going to come out and they're going to inspect your property. They're going to provide an estimate of your covered loss, or what they say your covered loss is. Do not assume that the adjuster is going to be fair and comprehensive in evaluating your claim. Do not make that mistake. It's going to be up to you to timely challenge the adjuster's claim evaluation so you can get everything that you're entitled to. This goes back to what I said earlier about getting your own estimates from contractors. Very, very important, because these adjusters use programs to calculate losses. One is Xactimate. You may have heard of it. And like any computing program, it's only as good as the input, right? And they are using, in our experience, artificially low values for various items of work. I'll give you an obvious example. 70 cents a lineal foot for drywall removal. 70 cents. Is there anyone here who's going to remove drywall for 70 cents a foot? Right? You can't get anyone to do that work for that amount of money. Those are the types of things that need to be challenged. Understand the difference between replacement cost value and actual cost value. First of all of your items of personal property, if you have the contents coverage, that's all actual cash value, which is, it's a depreciated value. When it comes to the residential flood insurance policies, if it's a single family dwelling that includes a condominium, and it's your principal residence, and your flood insurance for the building coverage is at least 80% of the full replacement cost of your home, you can get replacement cost value, which is better. Okay, so know your coverages. We talked about this earlier, but it bears repeating. Make sure that you timely supplement your claims with additional proofs of loss. In our experience, that's been one of the major problems with these claims. I know I sound like a broken record, but it bears repeating. You make your initial claim, but then all of these additional damages are discovered. You need to make sure that you are timely getting those proofs of loss submitted. Now we're going to get to really the hot button issue, and that is the options, your options in making the claim, and your options when you get a settlement. And this primarily deals with the FEMA 50% rule, which really should be called the FEMA 49% rule, because if you sustain substantial damage, we talked about this earlier, substantial damage, which is defined as the cost to repair your structure being 50% or more of the structure value, you got to bring your property up to current codes. Okay? You have a single family home in a flood zone. What are your options if you have substantial damage under, as defined under these policies? Well, you can't live in it, because all of these authorities are starting to condemn structures. You may have seen the stickers on a lot of these places, right? You can, if you're not getting enough money to fix it, right? You have some options that we'll talk about, but it may be a tear down. You may be coming out of pocket a lot of money to bring it up to current standards. You may do something else. You may sell it as is. We have a lot of clients who are basically taking their insurance money, particularly those people who are living on the water or adjacent to the water. Those property values are typically higher, and they're just selling the homes for lot value. They're taking their money, their insurance money, they're selling it for lot values, and they're moving on. And keep in mind, fundamentally, the federal government and these local jurisdictions, they want all of these properties to be brought up to current standards. Okay. So everything that they do is geared towards getting you over that substantial damage threshold so they can force you to bring your property up to current standards. When considering the FEMA 50% rule, or 49% rule, really, you need to understand how your, what we call your authority having jurisdiction, that's a fancy way of saying your permitting authority, is implementing it. If you live in an unincorporated area, it's Pinellas County. If you live in an incorporated area, you live in a city, it could either be the city building department, or in some circumstances, municipalities will then kick it back to Pinellas County to resolve permitting issues. These permitting departments are the entities that are kind of the gatekeeper to make sure that people are complying with the FEMA 50% rule. And I stated earlier that the days of kind of like the wink, wink, nod, nod about, okay, I'm gonna do a little bit of work over here, and then maybe a couple of months later, I'm gonna do another permit to stay under the cap. Those days are largely over because we're all under a microscope. So they're all looking at this really carefully. And one of the reasons why they are now looking at it so closely is we don't want to lose our eligibility to participate in the flood insurance program. So basically what happens is this: if local authorities are not the gatekeeper, they're not enforcing the rules, everyone in the area can lose the ability to participate in the federal flood insurance program. Everybody. So they're now looking at this with a microscope, and they're doing damage assessments. That's going on everywhere. We're going to talk in a minute about the various ways that they're doing it. But I'm going to give you an example. Another attorney sent this to me. This is actually St. Petersburg. This attorney attended a seminar that St. Petersburg put on. So St. Pete is using a couple of kind of thumbnail, rough estimates. If the drywall cutout is 2 foot or less, they're assigning a $38.75 square foot value, blanket value, for purposes of the FEMA 50% rule. If it's over 2 feet, that goes to $77.50. Okay? There are a lot of homes that are not going to be able to come under that FEMA 50% rule with these types of values. They also have a requirement of a floodplain substantial improvement package, and that deals with detached structures and other things. The point that I'm trying to make is FEMA does give the authorities having jurisdiction some latitude and how to implement this. The look back period is a big one. Different counties are handling it differently, but you have to understand who would be issuing your permit, because that's an integral consideration when you're dealing with the FEMA 50% rule. How you handle the 50% issue and what your intentions are with your property will dictate really which way you go. If you do not plan on rebuilding your property, then you have every incentive to maximize your loss. And in those situations, you really want to get all of these other estimates so you can get as much of the insurance money as possible. Whereas on the other hand, if you're really trying to stay in your house, you have a different goal. You're trying to keep your damages under the 50% threshold, right? So consider that, because how you plan on handling your claim will dictate which way you go. If you desperately want to stay in your house, you do yourself no favors by submitting to the insurance company the highest estimate you got, right, from a contractor, if that puts you over the 50% rule. You're biting off your nose to spite your face. So make sure you know what your goal is under those circumstances. You can contest the amounts that a lot of these jurisdictions are using to establish the 50% rule. I'm going to give you an example. I just got this letter, stated October 29th. A lot of you, if you haven't gotten these, you're going to get it. This is from the Pinellas County Property Appraiser's office, okay? And what they did in this letter, and they cite the FEMA 50% rule, they took the just value of the structure, my structure, they divided it by 0.85, and they came up with a value, okay? They are using that value to determine the 50% threshold. If you disagree with the value, maybe you're on the bubble, you're close, you can get a competing appraisal to increase the value of your structure to give you more leeway with the 50%. And I will tell you, based on the value they gave me, when I add that value to what they did for the extra features and the land, I wouldn't sell my house for that. Okay, so I think the value that they came up with is artificially low. Well, going back to what I said earlier, they have an incentive to do that. Why? Because they want to force you to bring your property into compliance. So in situations like this, you want to get a competing appraisal, talk to some of my buddies. I got a case going to trial in December, totally unrelated matter. I'm trying to get him to give me my expert opinion, so I have to disclose him, and he is book solid. In one day, he met with 7 people. And the sole purpose of what he is doing is trying to get these structure values up to give these people more headroom for these for the purposes of the FEMA 50% rule. This letter reads, if you disagree with the property appraiser's valuation of the structure, you may engage an independent real estate appraiser, state certified by the state of Florida, to appraise the value of the structure. The building official within the property's jurisdiction will review, and if approved, that will be used in lieu of the Pinellas County appraised amount. Okay, so there are 2 ways that you can really protect yourself in dealing with these claims. Number one, you can get your own appraisals. Number 2, you can make sure you're getting your own contractor estimates depending on what your goal is. And we talked about that. But you got to be proactive. And I'll say this one more time about these adjusters. Okay. That person that's coming out to your house probably has, 250 claims in this area. Okay. You're just a number. And it's not a criticism. I mean, it's just a fact of life. You got to be proactive, because at the end of the day, they don't look at you as the faithful policyholder who religiously paid premiums over a period of years. You're essentially an adversary. You're trying to now steal from them, and they treat you like that. So make sure that you protect yourself. A couple of other things that I want to touch on before we get to like a Q&A. We talked about the look back period. Okay, got to be wary of that. I think Pinellas County is using or St. Pete, and I think it's Pinellas County, using a 1 permit approach, which means that all the work that you're doing has to be done under 1 permit. They're not really looking back, to other permits that you have, but they do have the right to do that. So, if you had a permit opened, 6 months ago for something that might otherwise count towards the 50%, that might be included in the calculation. So again, you need to really understand how these jurisdictions are handling that issue. For those of you with mortgages, okay, it can become a little bit more complicated. We've had a number of people who have homes which are highly leveraged. They're not FEMA compliant now. Okay, the cost to repair those properties is over the 50% rule. Well, what happens in those circumstances? Well, in many of those cases, the insurance money that you're getting is not going to pay to bring your house in compliance, right? Those people owe a lot of money on their mortgage, and they're left with a house that they can't live in. Okay, that's a problem for obvious reasons. And you got to make some really hard choices as to how those things will be handled. My partner, Joe Murphy, I mentioned him earlier. We had this conversation in preparation for this, and I asked him for the most recent language that's contained in a lot of these mortgages when the security, that is the property, is substantially impaired. You're probably all familiar. You have a mortgage, you sign a promissory note. The promissory note is secured by a mortgage on the property. Well, we looked at a couple of standard mortgage forms. The mortgage company actually has the ability to take the entire check and apply it to your mortgage balance under those circumstances. Now, we haven't seen that yet to a significant extent, but these are, again, we're in uncharted territory here. And we may start to see some of these things. So make sure you look out for that. Make sure you keep your mortgage current, okay? Even if you're not there, because you don't want to get thrown into an entirely different basket of, you're now a defaulted homeowner, because their sympathy for you is going to, really shrink. Some banks may be offering, assistance, forbearance, whatever the case may be, and we're sorting through some of those issues. But largely we're relying on the good faith of those mortgage holders. So let me see if there's anything else I wanted to discuss with you before we go to the Q&A portion. Joint checks. If you have a mortgage, any of these claim settlements are going to be paid via joint check, right? Which means that you don't have control of that money until you get approval from the bank. Okay. All right. I think that concludes my prepared remarks. If anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
So I'm here on behalf of my mom's home. She lives in Seminole. A very large oak came down during Milton and cracked the back patio slab pretty significantly, brought down the pool awning, et cetera, pull of debris inside the pool, so on and so forth. So I didn't really want to do anything. I had a couple estimates, but I haven't gotten back the results of those independent estimates yet. Didn't want to do anything until USAA came back with basically their appraisal, which was incredibly low. I mean,
I'm shocked.
The slab,
That really surprises me.
the concrete slab, I asked them what, was $300. They basically said the repair for that. So at this point, based on what you said, how do I go about maybe finding a reputable public adjuster or somebody that can kind of work on behalf of maybe my mom and myself to kind of navigate through this?
Well, you have some options. In a situation like that, I could not in good conscience say, oh, gee, you need to hire me because of that cost benefit analysis that we talked about, right? It really doesn't work out. It may work out with the public adjuster because their percentage is lower. But the first thing I would do is get competing estimates, submit a proof of loss. Okay, I would get 3 estimates. I'll guarantee you all 3 of those estimates are going to be significantly higher than this adjusted amount. Okay, submit that. So that's on record. And then you may, through that process, be able to negotiate it in a way that is acceptable to you. Okay, the other thing I would suggest that you do, if you're acting on behalf of your mom, get a power of attorney, because it makes it a lot easier. Okay, when you're dealing with, if you're not the actual insured or the property owner, you get a power of attorney, particularly if they're elderly, make sure it's a durable power of attorney. But I'd probably recommend that first before you even got a public adjuster. Also you have to look at your policy because some of those ancillary type structures may not be covered. So you gotta scrutinize your policy for that. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. There was a Bay News 9 article recently, and again, take it for what it's worth, that said if you have flood insurance on a multi-story house, it does not cover damages to the first floor. If that's true, I've been paying for flood insurance for 25 years for no reason whatsoever. Is that true?
No, I think, and I don't know specifically which one that you're talking about. But the answer to the question is, yeah, flood insurance can apply to a multi-story house. Okay. Again, going through the same FEMA analysis, I think what they're talking about is kind of the illegal build out of a lot of first floor residences, which should otherwise be flood stage. Okay, so remember, if it's a newer structure, and look, a lot of people on the water do this. Matter of fact, personally, I don't know of anyone who has not done it. Okay, they have bedrooms down there. They have game rooms. One guy lost this nice pinball machine collection. Right, that's not covered because it's non-conforming. Okay, that is supposed to be for water. Okay, so I think that
To what height? I have a workshop that's 18 inches above the floor. The storm surge went to just a foot. So unfortunately, lots of equipment wasn't damaged.
Right.
Would that have been covered?
Do you have flood insurance currently?
Yes.
Okay. When did you get your flood insurance?
Yes.
Okay, and what's the age of your house?
2007.
Okay.
But still way over code at the point, so it probably meets present code.
Yeah, then the answer to that would be yes. Yeah.
Even though it's essentially first-ish floor.
Yeah, because I think, and again, I'm not familiar with that exact that exact piece that you're talking about, but I think what they were talking about again is this non-conforming use of a lot of these first floors. Okay, I'm substantially certain that's probably what they're talking about there, which is widespread.
First floors are usually garage.
For the newer houses that are in the special, hazard flood zones
Right.
up to code, yeah, it's supposed to be non-living space. Your mechanical equipment isn't even supposed to be there. If you notice, a lot of the newer houses, the mechanical equipment, the HVAC, all the stuff is built up, right? Hanging off the side of the house.
So it's not covered if it's in the garage.
It's really judging about heat, if you will, above that. level.
Yeah, it's whatever it's whatever the base flood elevation is, plus whatever, whatever that jurisdiction is requiring. I think St. Pete is 2 feet. Not sure what they have all that, but, yeah, and if you get into the point where you're trying to rebuild, obviously that's all going to be addressed in the permitting process. An elevation certificate, yes.
You made a statement earlier, Paul, about the wind-driven rain,
Mhm.
which by our amateur status, that's almost the definition of a hurricane, the wind-driven rain.
Right,
You were talking about it on the flood side.
Right.
That family that had definition of wind-driven rain damage under homeowners said they're not gonna cover it.
Mhm.
So the homeowners are, he's got hurricane windows, but it's still the pressurization, everything leaked through. So
right.
I know you addressed it under flood, but what is it? And I know he's got to look at his policy, to the
Right.
front line and the definitions and coverage, but wouldn't that be covered under the HOI?
Yeah, just to clarify, and
Yeah.
if I was
But
not
generic
clear, I
term.
apologize. Wind-driven rain water intrusion is not covered under flood.
Right.
Yeah, that was the point I was making. Yeah, so that would be something under the HOI policy.
So if he's been denied that on that side with all this damage that he has, and the adjuster's saying, well, we don't cover that because it's wind-driven rain, and we're both looking at each other going, isn't that the depth? So,
Well, he may not have windstorm coverage under his
Okay.
policy. Now, and that's a good point. I appreciate you bringing that up, Ryan. So windstorm coverage, right, is, we talked about HOI, windstorm. Windstorm is a separate component of an HOI policy.
is that separate than even the hurricane? When you got the hurricane separate part out there, like hurricane deductible separate?
Well, no, they're linked. I
Linked,
mean,
okay.
right.
Okay.
So I have insurance on properties where I have insurance, but I've elected to go naked, self-insured on hurricane coverage. Okay, some people think it's risky, it's cost benefit analysis. I'm thinking, well, gee, if I can go 10 years,
Deductible's 25 grand.
right,
Right.
so, it's you're just assessing the risk, but yeah, they would have to look under the policy. Now, remember, the insurance company is required to tell you in a timely manner the reason for denial. So if there's a denial of coverage, it has to be in writing, and they have to specify the policy language that supports the denial. Okay,
He's supposed to get all those documents and he says, tongue in cheek, I have to sign and agree to them denying me.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you
So,
get
so,
those
so again,
documents.
getting back to what we talked about earlier, they're going to be looking for every opportunity to deny you coverage where they can. Yeah, this is particularly when we have catastrophic losses concentrated in such an area, right? It's not like you had some single event. These insurers are now looking at massive losses. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Oh, this gentleman, here's a question. If you have a raised structure, basically a garage underneath, but you have an elevator, will they cover the elevator?
No, I've got one. That's why I'm going to do.
That's a fair question.
It's inside it's part of the building.
Right.
This is my thing. I'm not hiring.
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah. Well, again, and you know what? And if you were to call me on that, we'd have the exact same conversation. Because, we're a reputable law firm. We've been in this community for 45 years. If I don't think I'm going to be some net benefit to you, I'm not interested in taking your case just to get fees. So, I often look at these claims in the reverse. I don't look at it whether there's a claim, a viable claim to begin with. We look at the amount in controversy first, because the amount in controversy dictates, again, whether it's cost effective to get the lawyer involved. Right? I think good lawyers evaluate claims that way, because there are many, many instances in which you have a legal claim, but it makes no economic sense whatsoever to get a lawyer involved. Good lawyers, reputable lawyers will tell you that. And, I always tell people, look, if it were my money, I wouldn't hire me. I would do this. Look, I'm pretty cheap. I'm not interested in, spending money unnecessarily. That includes paying a lawyer. So it depends on the amount in controversy. So you always have to understand what you're fighting over. I call it monetizing the dispute. What is the amount that you're fighting over?
She's talking about a lot of people have on the
Mhm.
beaches. I live on the beach.
Mhm.
Elevators,
Mhm.
they're not covering them. Elevators are $40,000 to replace them, and they're saying they won't cover them because of flood. But yet they are built into the structure. They're boxed into the
Right.
structure.
Right.
And as you said, insurance companies will do everything to
Right.
deny it.
Hmm.
They're denying everything.
Why don't you do this? Send me the denial letter. I'd be interested in taking a look at it. I'll give you an opinion, but I would like to look at it. And, and keep in mind that there are different rules for single family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, commercial properties, when we're dealing with the bringing properties up to compliance for FEMA. So there's this, it's really a maze of rules and regulations. Well, thank you, Simone. Yeah, she's pointing out there's some cards back there, so you're free to grab a card. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
We have a condo on the beach.
Mhm.
It's a two-story building. And we have a condo on the ground level,
Mhm.
and there are other condos on the second level, which were not damaged significantly.
Mhm.
But ours was 5 foot of water roaring back and forth for about 5 hours.
Mhm.
And everything is destroyed to be even unrecognizable.
Right.
We had flood and wind insurance.
Not wind.
We were denied by the wind. And so we have a claim submitted to the flood. We did our best to try to define what we had in there. But it would say things like wooden end table, 5 foot lamp.
Mhm.
And I've got a feeling that that's gonna come back to us at way less than replacement cost. And there's a lot of things we left out. We
Right.
left out computers, we
Yeah.
left out
Yeah.
wall hangings, which are original paintings and stuff. When they come back with us, can we accept that check and then challenge their
Under many circumstances, yes. Okay, but you have to make that clear, okay, when you're dealing with your adjuster. But I want to get back to something that you said. You don't get replacement costs for personal property. It's actual cash value, which is depreciated. Okay, so, you may have some family heirloom, a lamp, right, that to you is priceless. To the adjuster, it's a 50-year-old lamp that's worth $5. So, you need to make sure that, if it's expensive or whatnot, you're getting, you at least get some value, some realistic value of it. But the personal property claims are very difficult for that reason. You're not going to be satisfied with what they offer, but challenge it. Make sure you challenge it. Yes, sir.
In line of this, your personal property or whatever. Should you try to get a copy, or can you get a copy of what your adjuster's itemization
Yes.
of those beforehand?
Yes.
And should you?
Yes. Yeah. They're required to give that to you. There's actually a change in the law concerning that. So yeah, you need to insist on all of that.
As soon as possible, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, so go ahead.
I'm in unincorporated Pinellas County.
Mhm.
What are my risks if my general contractor does not pull a permit?
Big. Okay, you not only have the issue concerning unpermitted work, which could lead to a complete redo of whatever they've done. And that risk is heightened now because all the eyeballs are on all of this work, right? Again, these are unusual times for our area. Everyone is now hypersensitive to not only the unpermitted contracting issue, which is against the law, by the way, and it is the homeowner's responsibility to make sure that anyone working on their home is properly licensed, but also the FEMA calculation. So yeah, there's significant risk. And it remains to be seen what ultimately happens with a lot of these jurisdictions, 2 years now. They're going to come back and take a look and, make sure everything was done properly. They're going to start, cracking down on people. So yeah, under no circumstances would I recommend going that route.
Well, he's licensed and this was potentially his decision. And as he's explained it to me, the rules have changed if you've had a surge. So things that never required a permit, like painting, now because of the surge, everything requires a permit. And he says that the county has no way to enforce the inspections. And my fear is that it's going to drag out for years.
Yeah, well, they have relaxed. They've relaxed permitting fees. They've relaxed the permit requirement for various things, like tree removal and like emergency repairs. And we've been talking about some of these mitigation repairs. They've relaxed permits for that, but no, that's bad advice. Because remember, at the end of the day, it's your problem. It's not his problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can my brother-in-law come up and just put drywall on 2 feet of walls and maybe 500 square feet?
As a homeowner, right? Yeah, it's your dwelling. You have the right to do a lot of this work yourself. Okay. And that's probably adjacent enough. Yeah, I don't think something like that is going to be a problem.
Well, we live on the water in unincorporated Pinellas. And the guy came in and gutted the downstairs up to 2 feet. And we were gonna patch some areas to try and restore our residents and put the drywall up myself and with the help of my brother. And is that gonna be allowed, or are they gonna come in and tear it out?
Well,
Cause I've heard that FEMA's coming around tearing out work that's already been done.
it depends on how high your water was. See these outlets?
Yeah.
Makes a huge difference
No.
if the water is here versus if the water is here.
It was just above the baseboard, but not to the electrical.
Yeah,
So
so,
we've already done the dry out.
Right.
I just need to patch some drywall together.
right. It's a fair question. And it depends on a lot of factors that I really can't give you an honest answer about, because it depends on how closely they're going to be, looking at it. If you don't have any involvement with your electrical, that's certainly a good thing, but are they going to know that? Did you document that there's no involvement?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
the adjuster's been out and
Right.
we sort of went over the plan, but you never
Right.
know what's gonna
Right.
happen.
Let me get to some of these questions. I see some of these questions here. Yeah, this is somewhat of a common question. Is FEMA flood insurance something you have to apply for prior to the event? Or are all eligible, or is everyone eligible for coverage regardless of timing? So the answer to that question is you have to have the coverage in place during the event in order to get any flood coverage. However, a lot of the losses are in fact uninsured, and you could otherwise apply for FEMA assistance. Okay, which is limited. It is not a substitute for insurance, but it is at least something. And I would direct you back to the FEMA website for the FEMA assistance guidelines, and also back to the Pinellas County website, which is pretty good in that regard. Let's see. And I'm going to apologize to some of the folks who are remote. I'm not going to be able to get to to all of these questions. What time frame should we expect to hear back from our adjuster? Within 90 days, for sure. Okay, hopefully before that. Make sure that, again, you are monitoring the deadlines for all of your claim submission. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for attending today. Thank you, folks who are remote.